The master, Omarosa's rollout of recordings leaves the Trump administration wondering what could be next.
Can you stand at the podium and guarantee the American people they'll never hear Donald Trump utter the N-word on a recording in any context?
I can't guarantee anything. I can tell you that I've never heard it.
Real quick, I can guarantee there's no recording of me saying that word ever. In closing, minutes from now, the prosecution and defense are set to make their final arguments after Manafort's team rests without calling a single witness.
Mr. Manafort just rested his case, but the government has not met its burden of proof.
And a shocking grand jury report details in graphic terms that since the 1950s, more than 300 priests in the state of Pennsylvania molested more than 1,000 children, and the Catholic Church knew about it.
We should emphasize that while the list of priests is long, we don't think we got them all.
We begin today with those recorded conversations and claims that just keep coming from former White House aide and Apprentice star Omarosa. Are there more than just allegations about bad behavior, or does she have proof that the president or others broke the law? And that's what matters. I have a great team here this morning to break all of it down. But first, I want to give you the big picture. There was a time in this country when we looked to the government and the church for cues on how to act, how to build communities, and how to work together. Those days, sadly, seem very far away. This morning, the headlines are full of examples of how institutions that help build this country are now letting us down. At the White House, the president and his administration are spending a sixth day fighting with the president's former protege, a reality TV villain. The latest allegations are about whether the president has been taped using a very offensive racial slur.
Can you stand at the podium and guarantee the American people they'll never hear Donald Trump utter the N-word on a recording in any context?
I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell you that the president addressed this question directly. I can tell you that I've never heard it.
That's not true. You can guarantee a lot of things. But we know the president has said stuff like this before, denigrating everyone from women and minorities to world leaders and war heroes. The real issue is not about the president's character. It's about whether he has done something illegal. Omarosa hinted that when she spoke to our own Katie Tur and the DSC emails were released during the 2016 campaign, what really went down. Take a listen.
Did Donald Trump know about those emails before they came out?
Absolutely.
He knew about them?
Yes.
He knew what was coming out before WikiLeaks
Yes.
released them? You're saying Donald Trump had a back channel?
I didn't say that, you did, but I will say that
How did you
I am
know
going
about
to
him then?
expose the corruption that went on in the campaign and in the White House. I'm going to continue to blow the whistle on all of this.
Remember, Mueller indicted a dozen Russians for hacking Democrats' emails in 2016. The Russians then passed those emails to WikiLeaks. If the president knew about the emails before WikiLeaks released them, that would raise a lot of new questions about how exactly he knew. But last night on CNN, Rudy Giuliani disputed Omarosa's account and said the president was just as surprised as everyone else.
I know she's lying because I was on the campaign more than she was. I was closer to him than she was. I was from about June to November. I was with him 24 hours a day. The first WikiLeaks exposure, he was completely surprised.
He definitely wasn't with the president 24 hours a day. But regardless, Omarosa says she has spoken with Robert Mueller and that folks in the White House should certainly be on guard.
How worried are folks in the White House staffers about this investigation, the Mueller investigation?
They should be very worried.
Are they worried?
Absolutely.
What are they worried about?
Because they have been hiding things from the American people and being very dishonest.
The staffers have been hiding things.
Absolutely.
I want to bring in NBC's Hans Nichols at the White House. Hans, tell us specifically how the administration is pushing back on all of this and what the tone is like inside the White House. You've got over 300 people who went to bed last night and woke up this morning saying to themselves, am I working for a guy that there may be tapes of using the N-word?
Well, this morning, Stephanie, it is studious silence from the president. He is up and tweeting, but nothing about the Omarosa issue, trying to change the conversation, talking about immigration and the election victories that he thinks his party had and he thinks he had in his effect. What you heard yesterday from the White House was an attempt to shift the conversation to talk about job growth in the African-American community.
But they lied about
the claim.
That.
Right. Well, let's listen to the claim that we heard from Sarah Huckabee Sanders and then do on the back end a little fact check.
This president, since he took office in the year and a half that he's been here, has created 700,000 new jobs for African Americans. When President Obama left after 8 years in office, he had only created 195,000 jobs for African Americans. President Trump, in his first year and a half, has already tripled what President Obama did in 8 years.
Everything about those numbers is wrong. Well, the only one that's correct is the 700,000 job growth for African Americans under the Trump administration. But when you look at the numbers that Obama had, close to 3 million jobs, the entire argument that Sarah Huckabee Sanders made, the idea that Trump had tripled Obama's numbers, completely false, completely not substantiated by Bureau of Labor Statistics stats. That just isn't the case. So we'll see today if there's an opportunity for the president to come out and try to clean some of this up. It's been shouted at him, this question of whether or not he's ever used that ugly word, but he hasn't answered it directly aside from Twitter. But as I said this morning, his Twitter feed trying to change the conversation, but he is up and tweeting. Apparently from the residence, he doesn't appear to be in the West Wing just yet. Stephanie?
And we always have to remind our audience, we're very happy to see a strong economy, but we have to remind you, you cannot compare the economy under President Trump to President Obama. When President Obama started his first term, he was handed an economy in a state of peril. We were coming out of the financial crisis. President Trump arrived to an economy that had been slowly ticking higher every year since Obama took office. It is stunning that Sarah Sanders would take to the podium and lie about jobs created under President Obama. And she doesn't want to lie. She doesn't want to give an answer about whether the president used the N-word. I find it stunning. I want to bring my panel in. It's one of my favorites. Washington Post national political reporter, my friend Roberto Costa, Republican strategist Noel Nakpour, and Princeton University professor Eddie Glaude. All right, Roberto, to you first. Omarosa's claims about WikiLeaks and Mueller. Do we know how significant this really is? Because this is not about whether or not Omarosa was a high-level person in the White House or whether she has credibility. She's somebody that potentially has tapes.
It raises two immediate questions about Ms. Manigault-Newman. One, is she really a witness for Robert Mueller's investigation, someone providing information about what went on during the campaign? And it also raises questions about WikiLeaks and Mueller's, the scope of his investigation. We've been hearing for weeks now that associates of Roger Stone, the longtime Trump advisor, have been under Mueller's microscope. And if Ms. Manigault-Newman is offering information to Mueller about what she heard in the Trump campaign, maybe about Roger Stone and or his associates, or WikiLeaks, or Julian Assange, or the Clinton dirt that was supposedly being dug up by different operatives, that would provide a window for Mueller into what the campaign knew beyond just that meeting in the summer of 2016 with the Russian lawyer.
Eddie, it's no surprise that President Trump went after Omarosa. That's his jam. She went after him. He went after her. But here's what Sarah Sanders said about it.
I think that he has made a number of comments about plenty of people, and to try to single that out to one group is frankly silly, because I think if you did a comparison, he's probably got a lot more nasty things out there about some other people.
Okay, so what do you make of this? She's basically saying, well, it wasn't racist, it was just nasty. But does that make it okay?
No, not at all. And look, we don't need proof that Donald Trump is a racist by finding a tape where he used the N-word. If that's the case, then we have a very narrow understanding of what characterizes racist behavior. It's not just simply using racial insult. What is important, though, is that the way in which he deploys this language, dog, animal, infestation,
fat pig,
breeders, right? It draws on a history of stereotype. Language doesn't exist apart from the context in which we use it. It doesn't exist apart from the histories that we use it. So the moment you use a word in a context that in relation to a group of people who have been castigated in a particular sort of way, even though you may use the same word to describe a white male, the moment you use it to describe a white female or an African American or a Latino, it carries a different register. So this is silliness on the part of Sarah Sanders. It's silliness on the part of the Trump people. I call everybody dogs. Well, one thing it says to me, at least, is that you're an indecent human being. We know that. And another thing that we know is that in the context of your historical behavior, it's just another indication that you profoundly racist.
I want to talk about decency. I want to share what President Trump said in 2015, justifying sort of his insults, the way he rolls.
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either. Frankly, what I say, and oftentimes it's fun, it's kidding, we have a good time, what I say is what I say.
Oftentimes it's fun, it's kidding. He sounds like Biff from Back to the Future, and we remember he ended up in a pile of manure. When you talk to Republicans, you're a Republican, Noel. No, but I know. When I see the president do this, it's as though he's conflating two issues.
Right.
Being indecent and political correctness. There are plenty of people who are exhausted by extreme political correctness, who do not want to rename their Christmas party the Snowflake Bonanza.
Gotcha.
I get that. But what the president is doing here is disgraceful. And while it might not be the law, it is our expectation for our president to conduct himself as a moral leader.
Right, and you're right with what you said, you're right. Both of you are right. We are dealing with someone that has not been in politics. We are dealing with somebody that came from a reality show in real estate.
I don't come from politics, but I'm pretty sure I don't call anybody here big fat losers.
But I'm not making an excuse. I'm just telling you what you guys already know, that Donald Trump, this is who he is. And on the tapes that you just rolled with him saying, this is funny, this is what I do, he's crude, this is him. And he announced it on the tapes, this is who I am. So we're all talking about it, saying you need to shape it up, you need to stop using this language, you need to, straighten up and fly right and close your mouth. Donald Trump is just saying, this is who I am. So I'm not even defending it, but his base is backing it up. They're backing him up. Look, and every time the mainstream media comes at Trump saying, what are you doing? You shouldn't be using these words. You shouldn't say this, da-da-da-da. They think they're picking him apart. He's doing so good with job creation and with the economy. Look what he's given us. This just reinforces the base.
Noel, I'm 100% with you, but then here's what's stunning. They then continue to lie about the economy, and I wonder if it ever makes a difference. Robert, to you, Noel brings up a great point that no matter what President Trump said, or if there's a tape, I don't think anyone who voted for him last time is going to change their vote. Right. But given the narrative that we're hearing, and so many people who are just not enthused about voting in the last election, they were not inspired by Hillary Clinton. Will Trump's reprehensible behavior inspire more people to show up to the polls who didn't? Because it seems that votes aren't going to get changed, but are new votes going to appear en masse in response to the president's conduct?
It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the midterm elections, but if you're thinking, Stephanie, about suburban voters, let's say suburban parents, suburban moms and dads, who are looking at this kind of language, charged racial language, using the word dog to talk about an African-American woman, you do wonder, would that push them perhaps towards the center, towards the Democrats? But then again, Stephanie, think back to 2016. The people who voted in the suburbs for President Trump then knew that he made the comments about President Obama being a birther back in 2011 and 2012. They knew all of it. They knew he called illegal immigrants animals. This was all there, and they still voted for him, many of them, in 2016. So this expectation that Democrats may have that there's somehow the Omarosa Manigault-Newman incident is somehow going to change things, well, I just haven't seen data on that.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I love him because that's right.
I agree with that point. But Tell me about how Republicans feel. And I don't mean Republican voters. I mean Republican lawmakers. I mean all of those people who work inside this administration, who already have seen people leave the administration and, unlike other administrations, have a really hard time getting a job. If they continue to stay and things get deeper and lower and they're going, yep, I'm standing by the guy who says this, that, and the other thing, is this posing a real challenge for them? You talk to them.
Well, I mean, it's a twofold deal. And I'm not telling you guys any big shebang, any big deal, any earth-shattering news. But the thing of it is, do people behind Trump's back go, oh my gosh, I really can't believe, you know, how he's acting or these words or whatnot? It's unprofessional.
But yes, it's more than behind his back. They're professionally standing by his side.
He is the president of the United States. He is a Republican. Stephanie, what do you expect that the Republican Party and everybody, every operative, everybody working in the industry, everybody running for office, what do you think? What are they supposed to do? What about people that were Democrats that didn't agree with Obama? What about people when Bill Clinton was elected and he had all the shebang going on with, you know, Monica Lewinsky and they didn't agree with it?
What about
what if you don't?
What about the country?
Where are they going to go? Where do they go?
They become independents. Do things to
and I'm not challenging you. Like I'm not challenging you.
I guess I'm just asking. Look, I would think that if I went to Washington and I worked in administration, I'd be under the assumption when I would leave, I would have job offers coming out my ears. Name one member of the administration who left, who now is doing something extraordinary or better than when they came.
I mean, Reince Priebus is doing what? Is doing lobbying, working for a firm. He's got more income than he was making. I mean, look. I mean, if you're saying that the Republicans are all ecstatic about the Twitter and the, you know, my button's bigger than yours and all this stuff that's going down, all this rhetoric, right. No. But the thing of it is, they're looking, and this, I'm not making the argument. I'm just looking at this from where the GOP what we have to stand on. And the fact of it is, the economy is doing well, and people see it. All right, but they see it.
This is the
now, what
is the argument of the Democratic Party?
I have to turn to Eddie, and I just want to go back to decency for a moment. Yeah. Before you can have money in your pocket, before you can thrive, you have to have self-respect. And Frank Bruni has a really good piece where he writes, the problem with being Donald Trump isn't just being Donald Trump. It is all the other lesser Trumps around you. It is the versions of yourself that you create, the echoes of yourself that you inspire. They devour you in the end. Omarosa, Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Mike Flynn, Rick Gates. Are these lesser Trumps coming back to haunt him? For all of those good GOP members who have been family values Republicans their whole lives, now they're sleeping in the swamp with reprehensible creatures.
But his candidates are winning in the midterm. The endorsed candidates are winning in the midterm.
In their primaries.
Right.
Right. But let's be very clear here. I don't want to give Trump too much power. Trump,
I'm going to let you know, he's a president.
I know. I don't want to give him too much power. What he's done is provided an occasion for people to show who they are. He's not created all of these folks. He's not the cause or the reason why people are indecent. He's just given them an occasion to be indecent. Greed,
he's making it
greed, selfishness, narcissism isn't the sole possession of Donald Trump.
He's given us license to let our free flags fly.
To be mean, to be hate, to be mean-spirited. Now, let me say this really quickly. In 1967, Dr. King gave a speech in Stanford University, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, he came to understand that people were more upset over the dogs attacking the children than they were about racial inequality. They were more upset by the brutishness, right, of the sheriff in Birmingham than they were about segregation. So you got this question of decency and decorum, and folk don't give a damn about justice. They don't give a damn about the country. So what I'm saying here is this, right? Donald Trump has created a condition for grifters, for people who are narcissistic, who don't give a damn about America, who definitely don't give a damn about everyday working people, to take advantage of them. They are the robber barons of the 21st century. And if Republicans are so invested in their brand, they're so invested in getting judges, they're so invested in overturning basic policies in HUD that will allow us to track segregation, if they want to get for-profit colleges to make money, if they want to deregulate so that communities that are suffering under pollution, people are dying of cancer. If that's what they want, then we need to call them for who they are. We need to say who they are. And they're not just simply the result of Donald Trump. They are who they are.
We're going to drop the mic with that one. Great conversation. I really appreciate it from all of you. I do. Robert Costa, moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Thank you, my friend. Noel and Eddie, please stay with me. I appreciate this conversation. Humanity first. That's what we have to care about before our political party, before our job, before our religion. Humanity. Up next, minutes from now, the prosecution and defense will begin their closing arguments as we enter the final phase of the Paul Manafort trial. So why exactly did the defense choose to not call a single witness? But first, there have been so many claims in Omarosa's book that late-night hosts are still trying to wrap their heads around them, including the fact that the book exists at all.
It's weird for Trump to say he's never said the N-word and also say Mark Burnett called him to reassure him that there's no tape of him saying the N-word. It's not a call you need to get if you've never said the word.
That's right. Omarosa's new book is out today. You can find it at most bookstores in the section marked "I Can't Believe This Is U.S. History."
In just a few minutes, the soap opera is back. Closing arguments are set to begin in the bank and tax fraud case against Paul Manafort. This comes after the defense rested its case without calling a single witness. Joining me now from outside the courthouse, NBC's national security and justice reporter, Julia Ainsley, and Daniel Goldman, an MSNBC legal analyst and former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. All right, Julia, to you first. What should we expect today? And remind us exactly what is at stake for Mr. Manafort here.
Sure, Stephanie. So by the end of today, we can expect that this case will be with the jury. That will be after about a morning, about an hour and a half of jury instructions, and then each side will have 2 hours to do their closing arguments. We can expect to hear from the defense a lot of ripping apart of Rick Gates, the most notable witness in this case, trying to blame his character and say that he's not a credible witness because, in fact, he did embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from Paul Manafort. And then in terms of what's at stake for Paul Manafort, he is looking at up to 10 years in prison for the crimes committed here. But then let's not forget he has another trial with different charges in D.C. That'll come next month. We'll be back here talking about this again, and he could look at up to 15 years for that one. He's 69 years old, so this really could, with both of these trials combined, if he gets the full charges, he could be looking at prison for life.
All right, Daniel, give me a little legal strategery here. Defense rested without calling any witnesses. What do you make of that?
Well, it's consistent with what their theory of the case is, which is that Rick Gates committed these crimes and Paul Manafort didn't know about it. So they're playing the reasonable doubt defense to say that the government does not meet its burden of showing beyond a reasonable doubt that Manafort knowingly committed all of these crimes. So what we should expect today is that the government goes first. They are going to weave in all the documentary evidence that some of which the jury has seen and some of which the jury has not seen, along with the testimony of Rick Gates, to paint a picture of Paul Manafort making millions and millions of dollars, hiding it in shell companies, funneling it to furnish his lavish lifestyle, and then when the money dried up, committing bank fraud in order to continue to live that lifestyle. Then the defense will go and they're going to say that Rick Gates is the guy who did this. And that's all, that this is all really just an elaborate plan from this criminal Rick Gates to do it, and Manafort is innocent. But interestingly, in federal court, the government gets to go last with a rebuttal closing argument because they have the burden. And at that point, the government will say, we didn't choose Rick Gates. Paul Manafort chose him as his right-hand man, and that's why Paul Manafort is just as guilty as Rick Gates.
Yeah, Paul Manafort didn't choose any kindergarten teachers to handle his finances. Thank you both so much. It's going to be a big day in court. Up next, a bombshell grand jury report in the state of Pennsylvania detailing a shocking level of abuse and cover-up by Catholic priests. So why are almost no new charges going to be brought? We're going to dig into that when we come back. It's devastating. This story is too much for me. A shocking new grand jury report alleges that hundreds of Catholic priests molested more than 1,000 children in Pennsylvania. And the report says church officials covered it all up for decades. NBC's Ann Thompson is here with more. Ann, walk us through this report, because These abuses started in the 1950s, and when I first saw it, I thought maybe it was years ago, and it's over by now. But there are some as recent as within the last 10 years, and these are violent abuses. There's a family, 5 sisters in one family. You've got a priest raping boys between the ages of 7 and 15.
Yep. And the bulk of these abuses in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, Stephanie, happened between the 50s and 2000. The 2 cases you alluded to were the 2 cases they were actually able to bring charges today and against those priests. But what's really gotten me is that they figured out that the grand jury found the 1,000 victims in the church's own records that they covered up in what the state attorney general calls a weaponization of faith.
This morning, the sins of the fathers and the bishops documented for all to see.
It was child sexual abuse.
A scathing 900-page grand jury report revealing in no uncertain terms that at least 300 priests in Pennsylvania molested more than 1,000 children since the 1950s.
We should emphasize that while the list of priests is long, we don't think we got them all.
The victims include boys and girls, children and teens, manipulated, the grand jury says, by predator priests, some using alcohol or pornography to molest, force oral sex, and rape. Crimes, the grand jury says, were brushed aside in every part of the state by church leaders who preferred to protect the abusers and their institution above all.
I knew the truth would come out eventually.
It's vindication for victims like James Faluzak, who became a priest even though he says he was abused by his pastor as a teenager.
These are wolves in shepherd's clothing. These people are not protecting the most vulnerable members of their communities.
I think that all of us will have a hole in our soul for the rest of our lives.
Julianne Bort says when she came forward in 2002 about the priest who molested her as a teen, the church told her it was hiring a private detective.
It wasn't him that they were looking at. They were looking at me. That makes me angry.
Across the state, church officials now in charge are asking for forgiveness.
We are sorry. I am sorry. We all must take this report to heart.
Almost every instance of abuse uncovered is too old to be prosecuted because of the statute of limitations. But prosecutors did criminally charge 2 priests whose alleged crimes against children happened in the past decade.
Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
The latest blow to a church still reeling from the resignation of Theodore McCarrick, once the powerful Cardinal of Washington, removed from public ministry after a credible allegation that he molested an altar boy. McCarrick is also accused of abusing seminarians and young priests. The U.S. bishops are trying to figure out how to respond. For the laity and clergy, this is a difficult test of faith.
It's a challenge to my faith. This should never have happened. And the church has to reach out to the victims and do whatever it can to help in their healing process.
For many people, this doesn't change their faith in God, but it certainly affects their relationship with organized religion and the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
Now, when I watch that, when I read this report, it's devastating. But from a legal perspective, how much can really be done?
Not much. And so what the grand jury has said is that, look, state of Pennsylvania, you need to eliminate the statute of limitations on these crimes because it often takes abuse victims decades to come forward to admit what really happened to them.
I need to share this quote from the report. Priests were raping little boys and girls, and the men of God who were responsible for them not only did nothing, they hid it all. Yep. That's what the report said. So I turned to Cardinal Donald Wuerl. This guy spent 18 years as the Bishop of Pittsburgh. He is now the Archbishop of Washington, so theoretically the de facto head of the Catholic Church in the United States. Can this guy really stay in his position? Does the buck not have to stop somewhere?
What Cardinal Wuerl's defense is, and what he says, is that from 1990 on, he really put in a process to identify abusers and to get them out of ministry. Long before the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, came down with its own plan. However, in the report, he is criticized for what happened basically in the 2 years before that. And so that's a very viable question. He says if you look at the totality of his service, he has done more to help victims and has realized what was going on and tried to stop the cover-up.
defending the indefensible. I don't know if there's one single child or person who is abused in the one place where you seek refuge, solace, and leadership. It's just unforgivable. Anne, thank you so much. What a tough story to have to report on. Up next, the president, he's up tweeting this morning on last night's primary results. While he sees a big red wave, we're going to explain why last night was actually an historic night for Democratic candidates. American woman for Congress in Connecticut. And on the Republican side, President Trump tightened his grip on the party. Republican voters rejected former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty, who called Trump unhinged and unfit before the 2016 election. He was defeated by Jeff Johnson, a local official who raised a lot less money. NBC News national political correspondent and my dear friend Steve Kornacki is at his home base of the big board. Break down the results for us.
Yeah, I mean, let's start right there in Minnesota. You teed it up. It was the upset of the night. Tim Pawlenty, former presidential candidate, former two-term governor. Look, Republicans looked at this and they said it was great to have Tim Pawlenty back in the race because they thought it would give them a chance to win this governorship in November. Now they will get Jeff Johnson. He was the Republican candidate for governor back in 2014. That was a very favorable year for Republicans nationally. Johnson lost by 6 in that race to Mark Dayton, who's the outgoing governor now. Who will he face this November? Well, on the Democratic side, the party nominating Tim Walz, congressman from the southern part of the state. That's a rural district. Walz has some voting record, particularly on gun issues. They had a lot of Democrats saying, hey, maybe he'll have some trouble in this primary, but he does pull through the primary. So it'll be Walz Johnson in November, and Walz probably, you look at that nationally and say for Democrats, that's probably an outcome they're happy with. The other big a big sort of news race out of Minnesota was Keith Ellison, congressman, co-chair Democratic National Committee. Allegations in the final days of this campaign about domestic violence. Well, you have the primary results in now. Oh, it's supposed to be here. Let me see if it comes up. There you go. Keith Ellison, he wins the primary big. And this story now becomes sort of a cloud hanging over the general election. The DNC said yesterday, as folks were still voting, they're going to look into those allegations against Ellison. Will we learn more? Will there be more revelations? Anything like that? Ellison, the Democratic nominee. That story, though, just kind of hanging there. And the other big story, it's in Wisconsin. It's next door. Democrats taking their 4th shot at Scott Walker. He won in 10. He survived a recall in 12. He won again in 14. Tony Evers, the Democrat, wins the nomination. Our poll in this race, the NBC Marist poll a couple weeks ago, had Walker down 13 points to Evers, the Democrat. We will see. Democrats have tried before. They think, though, the national climate, the climate nationally and in Wisconsin, may be stronger for them now than it was certainly in 14 and 10 when Walker was able to beat them, Stephanie.
All right, there's no place like home. So take us to Kansas. Chris Kobach is now officially the Republican candidate.
Yeah, so Chris Kobach, let's see, I don't have a graphic, but I'll do a little drawing right here. This is the interesting thing. Laura Kelly is the Democrat out there. There's an independent as well. But what Democrats say is, hey, they're thrilled that Kobach is going to be the Republican candidate because they think they can beat him. They think there are voters, typically Republican voters in a red state like Kansas, who are going to look at Kobach and say, you know what, even for me, that is too far. There was a poll.
Republicans agreed, though, because remember, it was Republican governors, it was Trump's own staff that said, do not back Kobach, back the other guy. He has a much better shot of winning.
And the reason, I think, is they're looking at the one poll that came out before the election. It showed it showed Collier, the incumbent governor, against the Democrat. Collier, the Republican, led by 10. Same poll said, forget it, not Collier. What about Kobach? What would he do? Kobach was losing by a point. Now, I think Democrats, Republicans, everybody sees that. They say if Collier's the nominee, yeah, red state like Kansas, sort of a typical Republican out there. That sounds about right. Kobach, that's a wild card. Look, he's down a point. That means he could certainly win the race. It is still Kansas after all. But I think that's why Democrats look at that and say, hey, they got a shot with Kobach.
Well, you got to look at the independent and wonder who is that independent going to be pulling votes from. Steve, thank you so much. Up next, at least 39 people are confirmed dead after a section of an Italian bridge collapses. We're going to go live to the scene as the rescue efforts begin the morbid transition into recovery efforts. Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. On your screen right now, you are looking at the aftermath of that bridge collapse in Italy. At least 39 people are dead, according to local authorities, after the bridge connecting Italy to France crumbled, sending vehicles plunging nearly 150 feet. I want to go straight to NBC's Lucy Kavanaugh, who is on the ground in Genoa, Italy. Lucy, some people have been found alive in the rubble. I know you actually spoke to one of the survivors. Tell us about that.
Hey, Steph. Yeah, talk about a terrifying ordeal. Today is a major national holiday here in Italy, and so yesterday this bridge was packed not just with trucks, but with families heading out of town for vacation, driving in torrential rain, 36-mile-per-hour winds. This woman that we met this morning, she was on that bridge watching it collapse in real time, 2 cars away from the edge. She escaped with her life, but is struggling now with survivor's guilt.
Silence, gas, smell of gas, smell of steel, and full of that. Terrible. Today I'm a little bit surreal, not real. Many people who lived here lose their life. Children. Why children? Why not me?
Now, her boyfriend was with her. He is a firefighter. He managed to save 3 people. Rescue teams are digging through the rubble right now. They're trying to get to anyone trapped beneath. But, Steph, time is running out, and hopes of finding people still alive are fading with each passing hour.
I know right now the most important thing is rescues, but have investigators given any clues as to why this collapse happened?
Well, that's going to be the focus of the investigation. Weather conditions may have been a factor, but the Italian prime minister said authorities are working on a theory of structural failure. The Morandi Bridge is about 50 years old. It opened in 1967, refurbished 2 years ago. It's been undergoing maintenance work in recent days, and we don't know whether this was a design failure, whether this was a maintenance failure. It is an old bridge. It is used far more widely than it was designed for, and there's a lot of aging infrastructure across Italy, Steph, and so the fear is that disasters like this could happen again.
My goodness. All right. Stay safe where you are, and sending our best to all those rescuers who are working around the clock. Up next, what can you do in 10 minutes? One 11-year-old boy was able to hack a replica of the Florida election site in that time. Who is working to block these hacks? And what are my children doing today? Because I promise you, over the course of 11 minutes, they cannot do that. Boys, you better tighten up your game. Plus, much more on the bombshell grand jury report on predator priests in the state of Pennsylvania. A survivor mentioned in the report who came forward courageously after 40 years in the shadows will be here. It is time now for Money, Power, Politics. The threat of outside influences on our elections is on the minds of candidates, voters, and top intelligence officials, certainly ahead of the midterms.
We acknowledge the threat. It is real. It is continuing, and we're doing everything we can to have a legitimate election that the American people can have trust in.
So if the threat is real and pervasive, how can we stop it? Todd McKinnon is the co-founder and CEO of Okta, a cybersecurity firm that is at the forefront of this fight. He joins me now. Okay, Todd, this last weekend at the country's biggest hacking convention, an 11-year-old, and hats off to this 11-year-old, hacked into a replica of the Florida election website in less than 10 minutes. I mean, my kids were playing Connect 4. How complicated is it, and does it surprise you?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's an important issue we're talking about, and I'm glad to be here. My first instinct was maybe he's probably too young, but we'd like to hire that 11-year-old to work for Okta.
But more than that, like if an 11-year-old kid can do this, what does it say about our system?
Well, I mean, it's tough to, I don't know the specifics of that website or that test, but I think it tells us a couple important things. First is that this issue of keeping systems secure and making sure that the information resources and the services we trust are secure and robust and serve the purposes they need to is a big issue, and it takes investment and it takes vigilance, and we have to think about not only the threats people think about today, but different threats tomorrow and as they evolve and emerge.
Okay, let's talk about that investment. And obviously the answer isn't yes, hire my firm will solve this issue. But earlier this month, Senate Republicans voted down a bill to increase election security spending. More funding is needed to tackle this, isn't it?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think we learned a lot in the last major election cycle in 2016, and I think one of the biggest things we've done better this time is that there's more awareness there's more awareness of the impact, and there's more awareness of the different avenues that people can use to influence things. Everything from, not just election websites or voting, but emails and confidential information, and sharing that broadly when it's unauthorized are all potential avenues of attack. And we have a much better awareness. We as a country and as an industry have a much better awareness now, and I think that's a good start on addressing this problem.
But to that exact point, there are so many different avenues of attack. The DNC's chief security officer, Bob Lord, he wrote an op-ed about this threat, and he wrote, "The truth is that there is no one program or one person who can stop a cyber attack from a foreign adversary. But if campaign staffers, volunteers, organizers, and voters all across the country can follow the basic steps of cybersecurity, will make our entire election system more secure." Do you agree with that?
I do, and I think